Hello everyone, this is Mark from Australia. I thought I would give you another video, just a short video this time, regarding a general issue, not specifically related to Stephen and Brendan, but important in the whole issue of the analysis of the US criminal justice system. I thought what I'm about to say may be of interest for us all to contemplate about this whole array of wrongful convictions that seems to go on in the US. And I want to put to you a hypothesis that I will back up with a few examples and then just leave that for you to contemplate. I'm not drawing a conclusion, just want it to be something that may be worthy of your thought. And that hypothesis is that the history of American culture contributes to the lock them up mentality to get a conviction, and that conviction approach, that historical cultural approach to policing, is part of what contributes to attitudes today and the pursuit of convictions, sadly more often at the expense of the truth. So that's just something to think about. You may not agree, but let me flesh that out a little bit further and you'll see the point I'm trying to make, or at least the discussion that I'm trying to evoke here. Now, in the United States, there are currently over 2 million people in jail. Just think about that for a moment. 2 million people in jail. Now, the US has a large population, obviously well over 300 million people. And so you would expect a lot of people in jail. But when you look at the number of people in jail, or the incarceration rate, compared to the population, the US is the most prison-orientated or the most incarcerated nation in the whole of the world. More people are in prison in the US per head of population than any other nation in the world. Why is that? Why would that be so? But by way of comparison, and just as a few comparisons, in Australia and in Great Britain, our incarceration rate is only a quarter of that which is in the US. In fact, in other words, it's 4 or 5 times higher in the US than in Australia and Great Britain. You lock up in jail people at a rate 4 or 5 times greater than in Australia and Great Britain. You lock them up at a rate nearly 50% more or 30% more than they do in Russia. Why is that? Why do you lock up more people and put them in jail? So I want you just to keep that thought in mind, and I'm going to flesh out and discuss this point about cultural history. Now, I've been around on planet Earth a fair while, and I've been brought up on a reasonable dose of American television and American history. I know I'm a bit of a fan of American history. I study it, I like it, find it fascinating, and I think it tells you a lot about the world when you understand the United States. But let's think about it. If you think about the development of the United States, how it evolved, how it was opened up, how it became the nation that it is today, there's a large part of the cultural history of the United States that's based upon bad guys toting guns and doing wrong things, and the sheriff coming into town and catching them and locking them up. It's a big part of the American cultural diet, and it's in evidence in both the factual aspects of that, but also in the way that's depicted in television and movies and other forms of educational media. Now, some of that's obviously dramatized, but the truth is we typically write stories about our lives. A nation produces movies about what really goes on in that nation. And this cultural depth issue about the bad guy toting guns, whether it was Wild Bill Hickok or Billy the Kid, or even epitomized in movies, a character like John Wayne running around or riding around on his horse shooting people. God, even in cartoons, in Yosemite Sam is a gun-toting guy with a long moustache, and even Quick Straw McGraw, another character in cartoon that epitomizes an American cultural thing about bad guys and guns, or guns in society, and bad guys and the sheriff coming into town and locking them up. And it's a proposition that I'm putting to you in terms of the hypothesis that cultural heritage is contributing to an attitude in current day society that says that's the role of police, to put people in jail. And almost it's their badge of honour to actually achieve that outcome. Now, that's probably a little bit overstating it, but I want you to contemplate whether there's some truth in that, because I believe there is. And those incarceration rates I just referred to would give you something to contemplate whether in fact that might be true. But before I come back to those rates, I want to give you another more personal example. Back in the last century, I was a student in the United States for 12 months. I was an exchange student. I went there to high school, to my senior year after I'd finished my final year in Australia. And what seems to be the case in American schools on the East Coast, which is where I was, that in your senior year you would do a trip down to Washington DC, to see the Capitol and all that goes with that. And in our senior year there were 90 students or so, and we took 2 bus loads down to Washington DC. When we arrived in the city, we were right in the centre of the city at an intersection, and the bus in front of the bus I was in, the first bus if you like, ran a red light, or slightly ran a red light. Not too bad, but nonetheless ran a red light. There was no danger in what they did. There was no accident or near accident, even though you should be careful about those things. Well, a police officer saw them, pulled them over. That's the bus in front. I was in the bus behind. Got on the bus, took the bus driver off the bus, put him in handcuffs, arrested him obviously, and drove him away, leaving all the students on the bus. So those 40, 45 or so students on the bus without a bus driver then had to pile into the second bus, the one that I was on, and as a consequence of that, of course, that bus was overloaded illegally, and we continued on to wherever we were headed, the hotel or whatever the destination was. Now I thought to myself then, which is a long, long time ago, decades ago, and now, why was it necessary to arrest the driver? Why couldn't that driver simply be given an infringement notice and have to account for that either at court or in a fine or something a little later on? Why was it necessary to put handcuffs on him and take him away? It seems an extreme approach to an offence that, while serious if it would prove to be true, but certainly not serious in the big scheme of crime. Now, of course, that bus driver wasn't locked up. He ultimately was released from jail later that night and came back and joined the rest of us, and got his bus back. But seriously, to me that just seemed, beggared belief as to how that can happen and why that should happen and why that was seemingly okay. Now, perhaps if you're an American citizen, you think that's okay, and I'm not here to judge that, have a value judgment about it. I'm just saying that in my view, that part of this problem, as I purport it to be, is this culture of policing involves locking people up and putting them in jail. And if you haven't quite done that and done it thoroughly, you haven't quite been the policeman you're meant to be. It's part of the cultural aspect of law enforcement, that you get the baddie and you lock them up. Now, we would all agree that no one wants bad people out on the streets, and we need to put people in prison for the appropriate offences. Prisons serve a number of important purposes. One, of course, it's a penalty for the crime committed. Two, it acts as a way of safeguarding the community from the potential threat that person might otherwise have if they weren't in jail. Three, it should act as a deterrent against other prospective criminal behaviour. And hopefully, four, also as an educational corrective service to rehabilitate people from their wrongdoing and make them a more adjusted citizen. that's acceptable in the community. Now, so prisons have a role to play and we want them to be there. But why is it? I'll go back to the point about the statistics. Why is it that over 4 times the number of people per head of population are in jail in the United States than in Australia or Great Britain? And why is it that the US imprisons more people per head of population than any nation in the world? Now, my hypothesis is it's a cultural thing. It's a cultural thing about how the West was won, if you like, how America evolved. You know, and back in 1791, when the Second Amendment, along with other amendments, came into being, the right to bear arms, to have them and to use them, that particular amendment, and I'm not here to discuss gun laws because that's a very hot topic in US political and social debate, but interestingly, if you're a non-American citizen, by the way, I'm not criticizing US, I'm a big fan of the US, and these are statements out of love, not out of criticism, but most people outside the US look at American gun laws and just shake their head and think, wow. Not the issue that you're entitled to a gun, but the way those laws apply, the types of guns that you are allowed to have, and the fact that they're so prevalent everywhere. You know, I've been to schools in the US where the sign at the front says, guns are not allowed on this school property. Really? I mean, I found it shocking that the sign was there, let alone whether that was in fact a need for it. But anyway, as I said, it's not a debate about guns. It's a debate about the cultural aspects. But guns, you'd think, have some link to that because, you know, guns are often used by bad people and police have to catch bad people. But this attitude of arresting and locking people up, in my view, in the US has this deep cultural background that can influence the behaviour of everyday law enforcement officers, and I would suggest that perhaps also influences cases like Stephen and Brendan's, where the pursuit of a conviction, no matter what, is just as much an activity of the heart and of the culture as it is of the justice system. And you may totally disagree with me on this point, and I'm happy for that to be so, and I'm more than happy to hear your views about it. But I think if we're going to get real ongoing reform, we need to make sure there are changes, not in specific issues, but in a general cultural issue, which obviously doesn't happen overnight. In fact, takes generations to change. But when you wear the tag of the nation that has the most people by percentage of population in prison, you know what? I don't really think that's a badge of honour that I would want my country to have. And perhaps you too might like to think about the implication that has for the broader justice system in the US. Okay, thanks.